Hey y'all, Vanadium Valor here, and today I wanted to make a short video about how I line art and color my comics. I have planned to do this kind of video for a while now for personal reference, but I figured that maybe some of you guys would like to see the process too. Starting off, let's discuss what line art is. It's important to understand what lines truly represent, which is a division between areas of high contrast. Typically, line art will help define the form and texture of an object, meaning that there are several things you must consider. Firstly, when is it appropriate to use lines? Lines are powerful in that they will always draw attention to themselves simply because they are usually the darkest value in the piece. That being said, there is a concept called atmospheric perspective that means that things further in the background have less detail and focus. In the example I'm showing, things like masses of leaves and grass aren't drawn individually, but rather I use line art to imply the texture by focusing only on the contour or by drawing a few elements. The same method applies to brick walls, crack textures, etc. The second thing to keep in mind is line width variation. Things further back in the composition should have thinner lines. When it comes to lining a single object, such as a character, I like to include a few wrinkles in clothing for detail. These typically have thinner lines than the overlying forms of the object, which includes the contour of the head and body. While I don't exaggerate the difference between the line widths as much as he did, Alphonse Mucha definitely stands out as a good example of this method. In cases of hard-edged shadows or places that receive no light, I usually like to fill in those areas and fuse it with the line art. This last thing is just something I've seen with starting artists, but you really want to watch out for the craftsmanship of your lines. Make sure that they meet up cleanly and they will read better. Shaky lines and lines that cross over each other or don't meet up all the way are costly mistakes, simply because line art contrasts heavily with the lightness of the panels and thus makes your eye more drawn to it. If this is something you struggle with, make sure to check your stabilization settings and your ergonomic practices. As for the tools of the trade, the tool you should use for line art is a brush tool that is sharp, clean, and responds to pen pressure. If you're using Clip Studio Paint, I recommend the mapping pen under the pen tool at an anti-aliasing setting of middle. My opacity stays at 100% and my stabilization setting is around 6 or 7. Keep in mind that there are other styles of line art, but these are the configurations I use for the line art in this video. Never be afraid to hit the undo button. Since I draw with my right hand, my left hand is practically married to Ctrl-Z. This ability is purely unique to digital illustration and should be taken advantage of. Now, let's move on to coloring. When it comes to comics, an important idea to keep in mind is that there are two compositions you need to worry about. The compositions within each panel and the overall composition of the page. Colors are important in conveying moods, so trying to maintain a palette throughout the page is advantageous. The first step for me is to color the characters and other objects who have defined colors. I personally use a textured marker brush I found on the Clip Studio store that colors at a lower opacity, but of course you can do this manually as well. With a lower opacity, you're able to retain the colors of the character while also letting some of the color in the background bleed through. I find that it helps ground the character into the lighting of the setting with little effort. This is especially useful in harmonizing settings where there might be several characters with their own bright color palettes that might not work well together. The next thing is to give each panel a base color, which I usually keep in separate layer in their respective folders. For reference, bright, warmer colors can be used to portray energy in periods of high action, while dark, cooler colors represent calmness or sadness. I like to go online and find a color palette and assign only those colors as a base color for the panels. In this example, I've decided to assign colors by rows of panels out of personal choice, since it so happens to line up with the amount of action in each scene. As you add more color to the comic, these base colors might start to fade away in importance, and that is perfectly fine. They are simply there to help guide your color choices. If I'm coloring objects that don't have a pre-assigned color, I color pick from the palette I mentioned before, adjusting its saturation and shade accordingly. I also color the background with a lower opacity brush, and often layer colors over each other, making them more distinct as it comes to the front. I utilize a combination of filters and gradients to contextualize the lighting in the scene. Flat colors and simple gradients also come into play when I have panels with vague backgrounds. Once you have an establishing shot of the setting, which is usually the first panel, you can use this method without worry that no one knows where your characters are in your world. Skipping over detail in the background can also be justified if they are ultimately hidden behind dialogue bubbles. Just to recap, my method of coloring consists of 5 passes. The first pass is coloring everything that has a separate predetermined color palette at a lower opacity, such as characters. Next, I decide the base color of each panel from the page's color palette. The third pass is coloring objects that don't have an assigned color with a hue from the page's color palette at a lower opacity. Pass number 4 is adding filters and gradients to contextualize the light. Finally, the fifth pass is making minor adjustments and checking that everything makes sense. Before I finish this off, I want to touch lightly on dialogue bubbles and sound effects. Dialogue bubbles will always be read left to right if it's not a manga, and are the determining factor as to how the reader will be guided throughout the page, since that's what we read comics for. Unfortunately, this means that some of your art will be covered up by them, so it's important to plan the script and layout ahead of time. In traditional comics, these bubbles will probably be white and have long tails telling the reader who is talking at a specific time. Personally, I like to avoid the tails altogether and give each bubble a color associated with who is talking. It gives me more flexibility when I have to transfer from a page format to the vertical digital format on places like webtoons and tapas. As for sound effects, I like to give them qualities that match up with their sound. For example, the whirring sound effect in this comic has small motion lines that make it look like the letters themselves are vibrating. In another comic of mine, I have the word crumble physically falling to pieces to help elevate that effect. Feel free to get creative with onomatopoeias. And that about sums it up. I know this video is pretty fast paced, but I simply wanted to show you how and why I make my decisions when it comes to illustrating comic pages. I know this is very dissimilar to my other content, and probably not what you expected, but I believe it was essential for my personal development. As for the next video to be released, it will probably be the Iridium video that's been on pause for months because of school, the comic, and being sad. I'll try my best to complete it sooner rather than later so I can focus better on my comic. Speaking of which, if you haven't checked it out yet, I have 3 links below where you can check it out. The DeviantArt and Tumblr links feature a page format, and the Tapas link features a mobile-friendly format. They release every Thursday, so make sure to like and follow so that you can keep up with them. OneOFF Periodicity will continue to the end of the spring semester, and hopefully by then I'll be working on the main comic. Of course, all of this with an asterisk because of the unpredictability that is life. Until next time, Selamat malam nerds.